All right. Hello, everybody. So, this is a impromptu headless giant podcast with my buddy Aimless Researcher. I just sent him a DM and he decided he was going to pop on. So, we're going to be talking a little bit about pagan topics because it's Sunday. And as everybody knows, Sunday is the day of Apollo. So, you kind of have to talk paganism, energy, and um, awesome shit when it's Sunday. Do you agree with me, Aimless?
100%. It's the everything.
This is what I mean. When we're talking about Sunday, you have to realize something. We're living in a subverted timeline. And I think possibly that Sunday is actually Friday. Tuesday is the real Sunday. Because way back when they switched the calendar from the Julian calendar to the Gregorian calendar, they actually had 10 days in there where people were rioting because they didn't know what the fuck day it was. Did you know about that, Aimless?
Yeah, and to throw in some context, I believe that most Latin-based languages use Monday as the start of the week, and if you look at the Spanish language, you get lunes.
Monday, Moon Day. That's true. But what happened was when they switched over the calendar, nobody knew what day it was for a while. So are we actually on the original days that were talked about back when Monday was first named? I don't know. It's a
That's a
possibility
bit.
we're not, you know? So I've been feeling Tuesday recently. I've been really feeling it. And my patron deity right now is Apollo, right? So I go through these rituals where I sign a contract. I call it a patronage contract with the deity, right? And in signing that contract, you have about 3 months afterwards to give burnt offerings, which is incense, give banquets, which I would say cooking food for that deity, right? And then doing other rituals having to do with the moon on certain times and dates. And so I did this with Apollo. And in doing that, I really kind of opened the doorway. I got a lot of insights. I'll talk about a few of them. But do you understand what I'm talking about? The concept is one of my own, but I think it's really applicable to a lot of different traditions when it comes to theurgy.
It makes sense. Instead of having friends hold you accountable, you have the gods hold you accountable, and gods are better friends than most friends because they can help you or destroy you if you do not live up to it.
Right. There's a huge accountability gap there. When you're talking about accountability with the gods, it's very different. I can tell you from experience, it is very different because what you'll find first and foremost is a rediscovery process, right? After signing a patronage contract, you're going to have to rediscover exactly why it is you felt that god or goddess was the one you wanted to sign up with. Now, at first it doesn't sound very awful, but you can't imagine what it's like to remember something but not remember the feeling. Think about the first memory you have, Aimless. Are you remembering?
Yes, I remember.
Okay. Now imagine that there's no more feeling associated with that memory. It becomes
Okay.
black and white and weird. It's like flat.
Yeah, it doesn't feel good.
Right. Now, remember the feelings associated with that memory. It's like it all floods back into you and you can actually remember it better.
100%.
Well, if you can imagine signing this contract the next day, Very next day, you're going to feel all of the feeling drained out of why you wanted to get involved with this deity. You're going to be like, what the fuck was I thinking last night? What's going on? That first feeling is you trying to rediscover why it is you felt drawn to this deity. Works with all of them. Once you've rediscovered that, then you can get back into the place of trying to figure out what exactly it is you expected from that situation. It takes about 2 to 3 days. And once you've gotten that place, then you can actually start to create based off of it. I found the best offering to gods is creativity, because you're sort of crossing the boundary. So art projects, cooking, all sorts of this stuff works really well with patronage contracts. You take something of yourself, right? You put it into an emotion, and then you craft something with that emotion. To me, that's like the ultimate sacrifice, right? Because you're going through all of these steps in your psyche that are unique to you. This is your essence, this is your soul, and you're offering that instead of, like, I don't know, killing things and draining their blood. It's a different dimension, right? But I think this has precedent in the Greek mythology. The myth of Psyche and Cupid, for example. Like, that's one of the most prominent myths around, and that has everything to do with cognitive processes. That's all sort of like the preface for what I want to go into next, which is women in that process sort of represent the wilderness, right? So as we're making artistic representations, we find that the women that are depicted, doesn't matter who's doing it, man or woman, starts to associate woman with nature. You get what I'm saying? Like, we've got Gaia. We've got all of these concepts that sort of tie women to nature in almost every depiction. Even the Venus of Willendorf, one of the earliest archetypes ever found, is a woman associated with nature. I think that's pretty cool. But where does that stop? What happens when you take women out of nature? Do they stop being a part of nature?
If you take women out of nature, I feel like you're just going to go to war and destruction until there's more women influence to inspire rebuilding and creativity.
This is why feminine spirits in Judaism are called chaos, right? This goes back to the serpent of chaos. Now, think about Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. All right, you've got the serpent of chaos and woman being closely associated together. There's a certain element of chaos that's always associated with the wilderness. Am I wrong? Right? The serpent of chaos. All of these things have to do with this chaotic element. It's something man doesn't understand, it can't control. It's all about the wilderness. It's all about chaos, and it's the bridge between the wilderness and civilization, the thing that we've created. That's the symbol we're talking about. It's like, if we're going to associate what kind of forces are opposed to order, we'd have to say chaos. And chaos comes from the wilderness. Like, if you imagine a comet hitting Earth, that would be the ultimate form of chaos. There's just no reason, blind chance, the thing just happened, and now everybody's wiped out. Pretty good example of chaos. And if you notice, all of the representations about Revelations, they talk about the comet Wormwood. That's the first thing you notice on these History Channel documentaries on Revelations. They always talk about the comet Wormwood hitting the ocean and turning everything bitter, right? Because they're focused purely on the physical aspects of this serpent of chaos, which would be just a random act of chance striking the planet. But it gives you an insight into the media mind, right? So what they're doing is they're giving you a predetermined outcome, which would be, if we're talking random, if we're talking chaos, it's going to be something like a meteor or a comet that strikes the earth, and that's what brings about the end of days. That's the narrative we get from TV channels when it comes to chaos, at least, right? So the chaos is always associated with some sort of groundbreaking, earth shattering event. You can think of a dozen different movies in that sort of scene, right? The chaos is this thing that comes from outside and completely changes the nature of the planet. Well, each and every one of those movies only really represent your own mind, right? It's all taking place up here. If you didn't have the ability to translate what was going on in that movie to your mind, it would mean nothing, right? And so essentially, all movies take place within the mind, and this mind of chaos is sort of like the soul. We go back to the Bible again, they've got different forms of soul. The first form of soul is the soul of chaos. And the second form of soul is the soul of order. So the order is in opposition to the chaos. We've got Adam and Eve giving birth to Cain and Abel, right? The mark of Cain is that mark of chaos, right? They had a third son, and his name was Seth. Seth was Set in the Greek Ptolemaic religion. It was kind of a separation from Hellenism, right? So the Seth slays the snake of chaos, according to the Greeks who were living in Egypt. And in doing so, it creates a new age of order. That's important to keep in mind because in Virgil, he also promised that this son of Saturn was going to bring about a new golden age. And that was between 300 AD and 100 AD. You're starting to see a trend here. Something about the serpent of chaos keeps following us around. In America, in Mexico, the sign of
You
the
have
Aztecs.
the Cortez. I was going to mention that earlier, and how
Bingo.
when the Vikings went to areas full of men ready to destroy cities, most of their symbols were snakes or dragons. And the interesting part about that, though, the Romans in the medical field, snakes were seen as wise and medicinal. So it was an omen of destroy the destruction, but it can also heal you.
You are on fire, my dude. So we're talking about Asclepius, the rod of Asclepius, right? Now, a lot of people have said that this snake energy is the chakra energy. And I would not disagree. Because if you think about it, life in general is opposed to total control. And for as long as we have had human zookeepers, this place has been a human zoo, right? So they view your nature, your basic identity apart from them as being serpent like, the wilderness, chaos, right? Because you're a wild card. So they've got to determine ways of getting you in check. You become the serpent because you're outside of their group. Do you see how this serpent is kind of this moving target, right? Based off of your perspective, the serpent always changes. Well, when we look back at Egyptian mythology, it's not
Oh,
just Seth
I'm
that's
sorry.
killing the serpent. It's tons and tons of gods are killing the serpent over and over again because it's the serpent within each and every one of us. They're talking about a more Buddhist concept of serpent here. You see what I'm saying, right?
I'm muted. I don't know if it was only me, but I think you cut out for a tiny bit.
Oh, okay. So in the Buddhist concept, right? The serpent of chaos is sort of like the first layer of reality, right? And so that first layer of reality is kind of blocking our view of the sky, and it lives in this sort of, I guess you would call it a sea of blood type of thing, sea of flesh, right? I call it kind of a, let me see here, probably a wall of flesh, right? So it's sort of like physical reality being tied to the spirit. And when physical reality is tied to the spirit, everything becomes a factor: time, space, relative karma to other things, right? All of this stuff is pushing in on you on this layer of reality. It's only through our cognition and our ability to sort of disassociate from this flesh that we're able to see beyond it. That would be the slaying of the serpent, because the serpent is within all of us. And to get through that, we can start to see God, or the totality of reality, more clearly. You got
I
me?
agree. I got you. And in psychology too, I recall they used to use the reptilian mindset. Think of it, your reptile brain. That's your survival brain.
Exactly. Exactly. So there's no way to get rid of this serpent. It's within all of us and everything, right? It's just an element that once you understand it, you're not scared of it anymore. It's no longer Baphomet. It doesn't take your mind and cause you to run to the worst possible scenario. You know what I'm saying? Once you have that understanding, it's like coming off of the deer path and going on to, the brambles. Like, I get it. It's not really going to help me, but I understand what you're saying. Because if I go too far in that direction, people are going to look at me weird, But you understand the first step. That's the first step to seeing through this whole thing. It's like you have to understand that serpent of chaos within you has to be denied completely. And there's two ways to do that, right? There's two ways to kill the ego: self hatred and realizing the ego does not exist. And then you can see through the serpent. Well, Christianity goes with the first path: self hatred. That's how they create saints. That's how they create these miracles, is because these are people who have denied the ego through self hatred. It's not exactly enlightenment, but it's pretty close. And they knew about that back in Jesus's day, because Buddhists actually existed over 2,000 years before that. You see what I'm saying?
I got you.
Buddhism was a huge influence in Christianity and Judaism. They have records back that far that shows they were sending Hindu and Buddhist missionaries out to that part of the world. And you don't think that changed anything in their mentality? I think what you're looking at is Buddhism and Hinduism through the lens of a Canaanite / Mesopotamian perspective. And when you understand Mesopotamian perspective, it is not pretty. You've heard of Nergal before?
Yeah, he's the god of death, I believe. In
God of death. Yeah.
Mesopotamian or in Sumerian.
Sumerian god of death. And he comes out of the ground in spring, right? Because spring and summer are the times for killing. So Nergal comes out of the ground, and that's when you get your indiscriminate killing on. And if you know anything about Sumerian history, it is fucking bloody. It is
Oh,
bloody
yeah.
as fuck. Imagine a spiritual system coming from those people, like Buddhism, being filtered through the way they already see the world. Does that sound like Judaism?
No one's out bloody more than Jews. And
Right.
genocide and.
You're starting to get it.
It's a death cult.
Right. So once you get that whole death cult thing in there, so like they they see Nurgle and they think, well, we could sort of transform this into something that we like, which would be this sort of Seth kind of energy, because they were already about that. But you see, they were getting this influence in the intertestamental period when they were basically monopolizing the Silk Road. The intertestamental period was about 700 years. We don't really think about 700 years, but that's a lot of fucking time between the ending of the Old Testament and the beginning of the New Testament. It's a lot of fucking time. And that time was mostly spent with Romans and the Silk Road, which are two things about the Jews that never get mentioned. Never. But that shaped their history, and that shaped how they drew up their history in the Torah, you know? And they basically, I know Adam Green and See Through It All, they don't like to talk about Khazarians. But when you start reading things like The Secret History by Procopius
Oh
about
yeah.
Justinian and Theodora, you know what I'm talking about. It's all about Khazarians. The Khazarians are the ones that brought about the Dark Age in Europe. That's fucking powerful.
Well, if I can add, I think that's why the world hates Russia so much, because it was the Rus and the Zors and the warriors of Russia that destroyed the Khazarian Empire and said, "Better be risen or be destroyed."
You got it. You got it. And you can see that in Justinian and Theodora in the first 600 years after Christ. It was all about the Eastern Roman Empire. And none of that shit gets talked about. None of it. None of the people talking about paganism. None of the people talking about Christianity. Nobody wants to talk about Justinian and Theodora other than Aeschylogos. Aeschylogos made a bunch of videos about it because he's like, this is important history. Well, See Through It All and Adam Green don't want to talk about it because they think that Khazarianism is a distraction from Judaism. I just don't think that that's true. I don't think it's a distraction at all. Like, that's what it is. It's one and the same. Hebrew language is a Proto-Indo-European language, right?
Yeah.
Khazarians are Proto-Indo-Europeans. These are all cousins who had feuds who decided to fight against each other. That's all there is to it, you know?
Yeah.
So what we have to do is we have to understand taking ourselves out of that equation isn't going to hurt ourselves at all. We just have to see through the time when they created these spells, because I think they were spellcasters back then. And I think the New Testament was a spell. And it was a spell agreed upon by several people who wanted to take out the most powerful force on the planet, which was the Germanic tribes at the time. And they had the most advanced knowledge of hallucinogenic drugs in history. They were pharmacists in every fucking sense of the word. And they used that to brainwash people and to attack people. And they were proto-communists. And that's exactly what Christianity was. Proto-communism fueled by drugs. And if you look back at all of the accounts of all of the fucking Romans and the Egyptians and all the in 461, they kicked Christians out of Alexandria. And if you look back at the original sources, it's because they were all high on drugs. They were fucking killing people while they were high as fuck on drugs. That's what Christianity was. That's how they got their mobs.
And that's why
You
there's so
know?
many books that are lost to history, because it was one sect killing the other sect over what book is more and who can be the leader of them. And then even,
Exactly. They just burned it all. People were really smart back then until they just started burning these fucking books. You know, I'm not crazy for thinking that.
and how convenient is it that Gazoria, this happens to put a land in the Middle East as the seat of their power, knowing that that seat of power is where Christians and Muslims, the two fastest growing religions via bloodshed, and they're saying, "Oh, we will always hail. We're the original people of this land, and if we have to do genocide, let us happen."
Right. And it's all in the same spot that it was happening thousands of years ago. And the first thing that should come to your mind is maybe this is a Bronze Age death cult, because those existed. Bronze Age death cults were a very real thing, right? What?
It's desert, desert religion, desert survival. It's just kill, kill, and build until you get destroyed and build again.
Right. It's not it's not conspiracy theory to say that maybe they kept that tradition alive in more subtle ways because they were masters of the mind thousands of years ago. You have to think about that. They were masters of psychology. This is where they got their magic from. That's how they did it. They connected these forces of nature. And you see that in their architecture, you see that in their mathematics, you see that in all of this stuff. It was all kept secret. It was all secret societies. Why is that too hard for people to understand? I don't get it. Like, once you understand that, you understand the rest of history. It's all been secret societies, and now the internet is sort of changing the landscape.
Yeah, well, you have a theory, and I don't know too much about there being three popes. The pope we know about, the grey pope, and a black pope, and how the emperors kind of just took power, and it's the
It's
same court.
it's simple. It's simple. They have ways of creating clubs within power structures. And those clubs have a lot to do with the mentality of the people within those power structures. And when you break it down that simply, people get it. But unless they realize that there are Bronze Age cults that are still around today, and the Bronze Age was all about survival, there could be some pretty fucking ugly cults around. You know what I'm saying? Really fucking ugly things that have survived this long on the blood and sacrifice of human beings. And if you
Yeah.
look back at the Middle Ages, is it really that much of a stretch? I mean, the oldest secret society we have today is the Knights of Malta. It's over 800 years old. You don't think that they have some connection to that Bronze Age culture? Not only that, but they
The
kept
Hessassines,
the
you know,
Talmud from 700 AD. 700 AD. And there's a lot of shit in the Talmud that is fucking gross. Maybe they figured out how those gross things could be used to control people. Is that so crazy?
no, the Talmud, it comes from the boy of all sports of the Babylonian Empire and how to stay. And once the Jews or Hebrews or whatever got free from the king, they went to become the Phoenicians and built it all over the rest of Europe and North Africa.
We got a comment from Riley. It says they bastardized Celtic paganism. I heard rumors that the Duatha De Danann were demoted into a lower position for Christians to promote the Abrahamic God and labeled the Duatha De Danann as just kings, queens, druids, bards, warriors, heroes, healers, craftsmen. Well, here's the thing. I think that was done under pressure, right? So the King Arthur mythology and all the rest of that stuff, it did take down a lot of the uh, divinity. of those characters because I guarantee you they were something else before that and they were transformed into it through the mythology that we see through the monks. What you have to do is then backtrace it and start to figure out some of the divine characteristics that then branch off into all these other things, which are certainly present in the King Arthur mythology. You can find plants named after Arthur. You can find all sorts of animals that have to do with the story. And if you understand that in the Middle Ages, paganism really didn't die, it was just put into different forms, right? So, one of those forms was the bestiary. If you've ever heard of the bestiary, it was a book having to do with animals listing their descriptions. Well, they would go a little bit further with it sometimes, and they would start to talk about their astrological characteristics, and they would talk about all these other things that had to do with these things. And these were the precursor to alchemical books, right? So the alchemical books built off of those really early medieval bestiaries to sort of test the waters to see what they could get away with so they could share their insights with other alchemists. It says, yeah, for example, it's hard not to associate the Holy Grail with the holy chalice from Jesus. It's
That's a
pretty
really good
much the
point,
same
Wiley.
thing. Right. But again, you have to understand that this was watered down and this was what was acceptable by the Catholic Church. So there's a lot more power behind it. You got to get to that original source, and then you got to basically maximize the symbols from that thing. So another thing me and my buddy were talking about was the 72 squares on the chessboard. 72 squares on the chessboard. Well, the Septuagint was supposedly put in place by the 72 priests of the 12 tribes of Israel. Have you heard about this?
Yeah, one tribe I heard about in particular was the tribe of Dan, and how they think that a lot of the tribe members of Dan ended up migrating to Europe, and what you see today as the Danube River is from the tribe of Dan.
Right. The problem is the Septuagint was written in 300 BC. That was about 200 years after the 12 tribes of Israel were scattered to the winds. So, according to their own timeline, there's no way that you can have 72 priests from all 12 tribes
No.
narrating this Septuagint. That's problem number one. Problem number two is the fact that Hebrew was a dying language by the time the Septuagint was written. So they only had about 3,000 or so words in the Septuagint, but there's way more than 3,000 words in the Septuagint. So, well, it was written in Koine Greek and then later translated into the Torah Hebrew. It wasn't written in Hebrew. Why was it written in Hebrew? It was Greek. The priests were creating a Greek creation. Well, that's
Yeah.
not exactly the holy book of God, then, would it be?
No. And I think the name Jesus came from the Greek word back in the day. Ancient Greek was son of Zeus, like Jesus, which gave the Greek folk religion easier time to accept this desert cult that they have today.
Well, Zeus and Deus are the same word. So in Latin, when you're talking about Deus, you're just saying Zeus. So it made it a lot easier to convert people when the words were the same, but the concepts were different. That's all they did. They just
Yeah.
used the same words for different concepts. That's the easiest way to convert anyone.
Yeah,
And
the master
unfortunately,
awards.
it's not going to work today. Like we see the big reaction to Black Lives Matter and all the rest of the stuff, trying to redefine words. All they had to do back then was just say it, and it was done. They use Zeus, right?
Yeah.
So, anyways, we've been talking for a while. I think this is where I should keep it. We're at about 35 minutes. Thank you for joining me, aimless researcher.
Sounds good. Thank you
Maybe
for
we'll
having
do
me
it
on your
next time.
show. Yeah, it was a great
Absolutely.
show. Thank you
All
for
right.
having me.
Talk to
Good
you
night.
later. Yep. Bye.